SpongeBob is a series full of mysterious mysteries. In case you haven't noticed, given the huge number of videos we've made about this series over the years, it's basically a goldmine when it comes to strange things and hidden details. And having made so many videos like this, it was inevitable that we would find several shorter mysteries that, no matter how interesting they were too short to have their own video. So, I hope you enjoyed this little journey into some of the darkest and most forgotten details of the series. A journey through several mysterious mysteries of SpongeBob that to this day have no answer, or maybe they do. So grab something to eat, get comfortable, and get ready to witness 3 mysterious mysteries of SpongeBob. Number 1. Mr. Krabs is directly responsible for SpongeBob's mental decline. I think we've all noticed how the show makes even less sense now than it ever did. Sure, it's a show about a living sponge having adventures under the sea with a slow friend. It has never been the most realistic show in the world. But there's a clear difference in the intelligence and maturity of the characters from the 3rd season onward. In particular, SpongeBob was much more determined. He was able to negotiate and convince people with solid arguments. He was even able to look at his situations critically, as we saw in the episode Krusty Land from the 3rd season. Even though he acted like an excited child about the playground they were building, when Mr. Krabs reveals that it was all a scam, Bob stands up to confront him about how far his plans to get rich have gone. Mr. Krabs just laughs and says he never cared about the kids, only their parents' money. This episode is important because it shows the dynamic between these two at the beginning of the series. Of course, SpongeBob idolized the Krusty Krab and wanted to work there with all his heart, but he was more of an optimist with the job of his dreams, not someone who would let his boss do whatever he wanted in complete ignorance, like what happens in the more recent seasons. In fact, the movie shows that his ambitions are greater than just staying behind a grill for the rest of his life. It emphasizes that he would like to be the manager of his own restaurant someday. That point was never mentioned again. This coincides directly with the end of SpongeBob's golden era, the 4th season. That's when the plots start to get more ridiculous, the characters become sillier, and all the characters start their inevitable change for the worse. But what if I told you that this wasn't boring at all, or abrupt, and in fact, we can explain it with the first episode of the season? Fear of a Krabby Patty. Besides being the first episode of the 4th season, it also features one of Plankton's most atrocious plans to get the secret formula, using psychological warfare. So by opening his restaurant 23 hours a day, Mr. Krabs sees a wasted financial opportunity by closing all night, and forces SpongeBob and Squidward to work 24/7. That was exactly Plankton's plan. He wants to break SpongeBob by overworking him, so that it will be easier for him to just tell him the secret formula. However, I don't think even he could have imagined how long Krabs would have made him work. 43 days in a row. That was how long it took to fill the huge order Plankton left. And this is where SpongeBob develops a huge psychological trauma on screen. And not only that, but in the real world, it only takes 3 days of working without sleep to start seeing severe cognitive damage and even be in danger of death, which is a diagnosis very much in line with the hallucinations SpongeBob suffers in the episode. On top of that, the rest of the plan had Plankton putting him in the chum bucket, where he would proceed to give him a horrible psychology session to cure him of his condition. And even though the show says this was easily fixed with hypnosis, the truth is that curing this doesn't work like that. In fact, when Bob comes back, he's much more submissive. He accepts Mr. Krabs' apology for reducing the 24-hour opening to 23, thus showing, with a small action, but one that would have been almost unthinkable a season ago, it shows that the damage wasn't really fixed. This tells us that the trauma and his subsequent phobia were only suppressed, not cured, causing Bob to experience a regression to a more childlike version of himself to deal with this trauma related to Krabby Patties. It's something he still hasn't been able to consciously identify, but it ends up making him overcompensate by being more dedicated at work so he doesn't disappoint anyone. This leads us to the explanation for all this. It seems that this trauma and other neurological damage are due to overexertion, long working hours, and even the pressure of being the only cook for such a popular restaurant. They have caused him cognitive decline that, over time, directly makes him dumber, which would explain why the further the series goes, the worse he seems to get. I mean, it's quite a coincidence that these actions start right after we saw him being overworked and mentally and physically destroyed at a level that the show never replicated. So, whether directly or indirectly, it's Mr. Krabs' greed that's ruining his star cook. and he won't care as long as he keeps making him money. Number 2. Plankton always fails on purpose. Sheldon J. Plankton is an incredibly interesting character. Despite being one of the smartest beings under the sea, capable of creating impressive technology, he seems to be inevitably destined to fail, and for very avoidable reasons, ironically. This is strange because apparently Plankton makes sure to check and simulate each of his ideas with Karen, who created detailed simulations of everything that could go wrong, telling him that his plans usually have a 99% chance of working. So why do they always fail? Well, an interesting idea is that the secret formula isn't his real goal. Sure, he goes all out for it every episode. But, like any evil scientist, his real goal is to take over the world. I mean, even when he has a Krabby Patty with him and absolutely nothing seems to be going wrong, he sabotages himself, as if that wasn't really the true goal. Even when he's caught, he seems to care little or nothing, not just because he seems to escape from jail by his own methods, but, well, how bad can the sentence be for stealing a burger? Even if they catch him, his imprisonment is never for anything really serious. It could be that the formula is really just an excuse for something more diabolical, testing his inventions before seeing which one is the best option for his master plan. And what better way than to use them against the childhood friend he's envied for so long? You just have to see that most of his plans involve some kind of deception, from using Sandy as a skin suit to see if he could pass himself off as someone else, to using a robotic replica of Mr. Krabs that could be a prototype of the previous idea, to using a gas that turns everyone into babies. As if all of this were a psychological warfare workshop to understand how to dominate or manipulate a person through their fears. And well, why should this last thing be important? Well, if we decide to take the movie as the final point of the series, something that literally happened before Nickelodeon continued with SpongeBob beyond the plans of its creator, then an idea would be presented that completely changes how we see Plankton, because Plan Z would actually be the culmination of all his plans throughout the series. Using his skills of theft and deception to take the crown, taking advantage of his knowledge of Mr. Krabs to make him look like the culprit, and finally using the Krabby Patty formula as bait to attract people. Meanwhile, with his knowledge of psychological manipulation, along with the replication and transplantation of living brains into robotic bodies that he has been testing for years, now he can have what he always wanted, his own army of slaves. In this way, Plankton goes from being a huge idiot to a mastermind. He took advantage of every little opportunity to refine a diabolical plan that almost worked completely, systematically eliminating all the variables that could have stopped him. He only lost because, well, I guess no one would expect that the power of music and an awesome guitar solo would be enough to stop years of careful planning. So next time you turn on the TV and see a plan that's too ridiculous to work, just remember that Plankton already knows. But he's neutralizing absolutely every possible variable so that Plan Z is completely foolproof. Number 3. The Bikini Bottom Killer. The background characters are one of the most important and overlooked aspects of the show. All the fish we see in the background have been created with a lot of care. They have stories, names, and unique personalities. Gradually, they uncover the unusual lives of Bikini Bottom's residents, along with their fetishes, crimes, and all kinds of oddities that the show doesn't seem interested in explaining directly. And few have a secret as dark as the 6th incidental, or Tom as he's usually known. You'll mostly know him because he's that fish who had a psychotic breakdown over chocolate, and he's a pretty volatile character. For example, in the April Fool's Day episode, he overreacts to SpongeBob playing an innocent prank on him. He threatens him with physical violence, and he only calms down after it's explained to him what happened. What's curious is that Tom directly accuses him of having done something to his drink, with the clear paranoia that SpongeBob could be a dangerous criminal. In another one of his appearances, he falsely claims that someone poisoned his water supply, burned his crops, and brought a plague to their homes, which, when it's mentioned that it's a lie, he justifies himself by saying, "Are we supposed to wait until he does it?" Seen this way, Tom fits perfectly into the profile of a paranoid man who believes that someone or something wants to do him harm, whether it's the universe itself or a particular person, and his response to these hunches is almost always violence. Even seeing his appearance in the chocolate episode under this new light, when he catches up to them, it's hard not to see it as a much darker speech. Now that the violent tendencies of this particular fish have been demonstrated, there are 2 details the show gives us that prove we shouldn't trust him at all. Throughout the show, we've seen that he's incapable of holding down a steady job, taking on different professions like chef, some kind of office position, and he's even in prison at one point, so it seems that he must have at least committed some kind of crime. These inconsistencies are also seen in his relationships, since he has 3 wives, different children, and he even had some unknown dates that are never explained. But the most important detail that shows us that this is a fugitive man is that, despite being one of those few characters with a fixed name, in Season 4 he makes one of his brief appearances with a new haircut and a new name, now calling himself John. He even appears in a completely different color in one episode, which seems to be another attempt to camouflage his identity, because when we saw him in prison, he already looked a bit different, which wouldn't be strange in Bikini Bottom, knowing that there's an entire clinic dedicated to helping fish completely change their identity. And the thing is, Tom doesn't seem to be short on money. In the end, what he paid the guys for those chocolates was enough to reserve a fancy restaurant all by himself. So I think that any kind of physical alteration isn't out of the question. So, to recap, not only is he a dangerous, food-addicted psychopath with a suspiciously shady past, but he also changes his appearance constantly, and he's changed his identity at least once. On top of that, he has a ridiculous persecution complex, which leads him to do all these things. And his partners constantly and mysteriously disappear. They're always being replaced by a new partner we didn't know. It's this last point that makes everything darker and more interesting, because maybe his persecution complex isn't just simple, irrational paranoia. Maybe it did start out that way, irrationally suspecting that some partner was hurting him in one way or another, and knowing that his preferred response is excessive violence. It didn't end well. I mean, we know for sure that he ended up in jail, so even if his first crime wasn't that serious, this analysis we've done leads me to think that after that mysterious first crime, his violence and paranoia led him into an endless cycle of murders, which explains the sudden disappearance of each and every one of his partners, with violence being his first response to any act that triggered his paranoia. It's a theory as crazy as it is plausible, because it fits suspiciously well with the disappearances and other evidence. I'm just saying, if he was capable of chasing 2 salesmen to the ends of the earth over a chocolate bar, only God knows what he'd do if someone got close to uncovering the truth about that first crime. As always, thank you so much for watching this video, but above all, thank you for staying until the end. And remember, if someone wants to buy a whole supply of chocolate from you with dirty bills, run. Or maybe you'll star in our next Momentos Latino America video. Goodbye.